Welcome everyone to iNACOL's January Teacher Talk webinar. My name is Natalie Abel. I'm a program manager here at iNACOL and I'll be kicking us off today. So thank you all so very much for joining. We're thrilled to have you all here. I'm sure some more folks will be trickling in, but before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to run through quickly. In the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you should see a chat box. I encourage you to introduce yourself. We'd love to know who you are, where you're tuning in from, what you're hoping to get out of today's webinar, and any other questions that you might have. Be sure to throw them in the chat box as we go as well, and we'll take some time to make sure that those get answered for you as well. And if you are a fan of social media, we encourage you to share what you're learning there as well. We'll throw some information. Yep, Ashley just shared it in the chat box there for you. You can be sure to tag us and use hashtag StuVoice, and that way we can extend our learning to our networks on social media too. And tonight's webinar will be recorded and archived on the inacol.org website, so you'll be able to download the slides, and you'll also be able to access a full recording of tonight's webinar as well. So we'll be sure to send you a follow-up link with those resources, so you'll be able to refer back to this content or information at any point that you might need to in the future, and share it with your networks and your peers as well. So today we are so grateful to have Merritt Jones, who is the Director of Partnerships at Student Voice, and 3 students sharing their insights on incorporating student voice into their learning. So we have Leah, who is a student at Swansea High School, Chelsea, who is a student at Washington Leadership Academy, and Justin, who is a student at Waukee High School. So without further ado, I will now turn it over to Merritt Jones to kick us off today. So Merritt, it's all you. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Good evening, everyone, and we are so excited to join you and chat a little bit about student voice and what that looks like in the classroom, and in particular, these students I've brought to share with you and their stories. So I really wanted to make this about all of you and make this really interactive. So please ask questions. We'll stop in the middle to take some questions as well as take some at the end. But I also wanted to make sure that we were covering a pretty diverse set of educational experiences. So I have included Chelsea, who is from the Washington Leadership Academy in DC, which was recently selected as an XQ Super School. It's a charter in DC, and I will have her talk a little bit about that in just a minute. I've brought Leah, who's from Swansea, South Carolina, and my home state of South Carolina. It's a very, very rural high school with a lot of low-income students, and she'll talk about that experience. And then I wanted to include Justin, who attends Waukee High School in the suburban area outside of Des Moines. And I wanted him to share his experience, not only with his really interesting high school, but with his leadership in the Iowa Student Learning Institute. So tonight we really just want to talk about, I want to have them share their experiences and talk a little bit about some practical hacks and ways we can overcome learned helplessness and include not only student voice, but teacher voice, because I think we can all probably agree that we're collectively neglected in building the system of education. So I want to kick it off by having each of our panelists introduce themselves, and we will start with Justin.
All right. Yeah, so thanks for that introduction, Merritt. I'm really happy to be here with you all, and thank you to everyone who's joining, too. I think we're going to have a really good discussion tonight. So as Merritt said, I attend Waukee High School in Waukee, Iowa, which is a suburb of Des Moines. We're about 20 minutes out. Waukee High School this year was actually rated by Newsweek as the #1 high school in Iowa. And I think that's in part to several reasons, but we do some really forward-thinking and innovative things when it comes to work-based learning, as well as implementing student voice into our classrooms. And on top of that, I'm the president of an organization called the Iowa Student Learning Institute. And we've been around for 3 years now, and we work through several different things to implement student voice into classrooms, and we use our student advocacy and our diverse team of students that we've built over the past few years to try and impact as many Iowa students' lives as we can. And so we've seen some pretty incredible results from that.
Thank you, Justin. And I'm going to have you talk a little bit about that after we finish up some introductions. Chelsea, will you share with us a little bit about yourself and your school?
All right, so my name is Chelsea Casarias. I attend Washington Leadership Academy in Washington, D.C. It's a really new school. It opened this year. I mean, technically last year, but this year. And all of we only have 9th grade so far, and all of our students are considered founders. We are building up the school, and I've been focusing on student voice with the principals, and I've been telling them the problems that have been happening around the school, and I'm thinking of bringing up a club in the school to bring up some student voice and how students can learn to get their voice out to staff and see what they can, and see the changes that can go out to the school. Because most of the main goal of the school is to get close to the students and make sure they all attend college. And so by building the relationships, I believe that students will have a better student voice and telling those teachers how they feel about the classroom. And I think it's really changing the way I perceive my school and other schools as well.
Thank you, Chelsea. And finally, Leah, will you share a little bit about yourself and Swansea?
I'd love to. Thank you so much, Merritt, for the kind introduction. My name is Leah Knight, and I attend Swansea High School in South Carolina. We are a very rural school district. By no means are we brand new. I can't tell you off the top of my head how long we've been around, but my grandfather, who is 75 years old, attended Swansea High School. So we've been around for a very, very long time, and a lot of the people who attend Swansea, their parents went there, their grandparents went there. A lot of people don't move in and out of the area. Like I said, we're very rural. We're a low-income school district. We do not receive a very high tax base, or the industry in our area is very low. Therefore, compared to the other schools in neighboring areas like Lexington, we don't have the same resources. But we are a very proud school. I'm so happy to attend Swansea. We have about 700 students in our high school because we are only 10th through 12th grade. Our freshmen are at a different school, our freshman academy. But we've all grown up together. We don't have a bunch of elementary schools feeding into our high school. We all went to primary school, elementary school, middle school together, and now we all attend high school together. But we started a student voice program at Swansea about a year ago when Merritt came and visited us and started talking to us about the National Student Voice Program. And we've been so proud to kick it off, and we've started talking with our administrators about how we feel about our education and the new programs they're implementing, like project-based learning, and how it's working for us and how it's changing our education. And so we're a Transform SC school, which means we are trying to implement those programs, and we're one of the first schools, and we're starting it at a very young level at our ECC, which is our Early Childhood Center, which houses our 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds. They've started the Montessori program, which is where they're all in class together. And so we're starting at a young age trying these different programs to see how it's going to work in the future for us. And so I'm really excited about this panel, and I want to say thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you for your knowledge. And I look forward to exploring some of the things you just mentioned. But I really want to start with each of your stories and how you essentially ended up here this evening. I think the number one issue I've experienced as I've traveled across the country and held roundtable discussions with students of all ages is really there is a learned helplessness in schools. We don't ask students their opinions. So initially that, the first time you ask them to tell you about their school, you don't get a lot because we're not used to being asked and being asked to think critically. We're asked to think critically about everything all day, but never about school itself. And so, when given the opportunity, sometimes students pass that up. So commenting learned helplessness is definitely something really difficult to overcome and kind of the key problem to implementing and using student voice in the classroom. So I want to hear from each of you, maybe if you can tell me or recall or, pinpoint in the moment when you discovered that you had a voice and that your voice mattered. So again, we'll start with Justin.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you bring this up. I haven't even thought of that in a while. I suppose my passion for student voice really began in late middle school, probably in about 8th grade. And in that year, I really struggled to find outlets in which I could share my opinions on class curriculum and on how teachers taught things and how rigid our school schedules were, and a whole myriad of things. But through several experiences at this middle school, I learned some very important lessons about student voice. The most important lesson I learned was that there aren't really any good examples of student voice, or there weren't at the time in our district. So by having those experiences, I kind of made it a personal mission to figure something out and to try and make our district better. So in the search of doing that, I came across the organization Iowa Student Learning Institute, which was founded 4 years ago, and then I took over as president just last year. And so throughout my whole time working for ISLI, I've met students from all across Iowa, and I've met teachers from all across Iowa who tell me the same thing, which is that they do not have an adequate amount of student voice or student outlet in their school. So my organization and the people that work for it, we are dedicated to fixing that and dedicated to giving those students a voice, because it's not a problem that students have one. The problem is that schools don't allow students to use their voice. So that's the big focus, and that's kind of how I got involved.
Thank you, Justin. And after we have everybody share, I want to kind of get into some of the nuances of the Iowa Student Learning Institute and the model you guys have started in Iowa, and maybe how that can be replicated. But Chelsea, can you pinpoint a time or a moment when you really realized that your voice mattered?
Well, as well, the same thing with Justin, I realized that that I needed to speak up to my fellow students when I was in the 8th grade, due to how there's a lot of problems in the school, in middle school, with behaviors, and nobody's really getting the education, and none of the teachers would really listen. But recently, when I came here to Washington Leadership Academy, one of the first things they said to us is that our voice matters, and that whatever how we are feeling in the building and what we could change in the building, we can come to them about it. And so it made me really feel comfortable in the school, made me passionate about my voice, and made me want to bring up problems that were going around there at the school building, and even just problems going on outside the world, outside the school building that's affecting other students. And just bringing it up to the school is really helpful for them, because they get to find out what's going on and all that. But just that instant change from having no voice in my middle school and then having a voice here really made me feel empowered and made me feel like I have a voice, and by using my voice, I can really change perspectives in other schools, and that students can speak up for what they believe in.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Chelsea. And we're going to talk about something specific next that we've talked about, and how you have worked to use your voice to help change your school culture. So Leah, can you recall the time you really discovered your voice?
I most definitely probably discovered my voice when I was a freshman a few years ago, and it was definitely obvious to me because coming from a middle school, our middle school atmosphere was very, very strict. In order to keep, behavioral issues down and keep grades up, the administrators had to keep a very tight leash on all of the students. But when we got to our freshman academy, we had a principal who was a principal for his very first year, and he was bound and determined to give us not only freedom but a lot of responsibility. And that's when I think I first realized that I had a voice, because he started a program called Be the Change at our high school that let students pick issues that they felt passionate about. A couple kids chose like cancer research, special needs, illegal immigration, things like that they felt passionate about. Well, I chose educational reform as my issue. And so that's when I was first introduced to all the discrepancies between school districts and how students could have a part in their education process. And so that's when I first realized it. And my freshman year was a lot of collecting information, learning about the whole process of how, schools are funded and how lesson plans are made out and things like that for students. But I didn't really start using my voice, I don't think, until probably last year when Merritt, you came and visited us at Swansea High School, and you met with a panel of us students, and we actually created our actual group and started taking the information that we collected and using it. We made several trips to the State House. We've met with our Superintendent of Education, Molly Spearman. We've met with several of our senators in South Carolina, and we've definitely shared what we've collected with people who have the power to change policies and make bills that could potentially change our education.
Thank you, Leah. And I'm always so excited to hear about what you guys are doing, and I really want to get into that in just a minute. So now I would like to really let you guys hear what incredible things these students are doing in their own schools. So again, we'll start with Justin, who runs this organization that is doing incredible work and hosts events, and one of which I had the privilege to attend in the fall, to really start these conversations. And these events are held with teachers too, so it's all about a collective voice. And then I also would love, Justin, for you to briefly touch on your school, Waukee, and what makes Waukee special. As you mentioned, it was voted the #1 school in Iowa, and I quickly realized, this was not an ordinary school, and would love for you to touch on, how students have made it such.
Yep. So I'll start with the organization Iowa SLI. I sent the URL to our website in the chat. I encourage you guys to check it out. So, like I mentioned before, Iowa Student Learning Institute is focused around revolutionizing Iowa's approach to education through the power of student voice. And that's kind of a big bundle of words, but really what it means is we're using student advocacy and our student team to work with students in their schools to bring student voice into their schools. So we do this by hosting 3 annual events. We follow a cycle called Motivate, Ideate, Change. So we start in the fall with our RISE conference, which is where we bring together the initial batch of students and teachers to motivate them and to get them excited about using their voice. And then once that's done, we move into Stu Camp, which is happening soon here in February. And at that event, we start talking about ideas. We start kind of capitalizing on our initial thoughts and thinking of ways we can change our schools and our legislation to further benefit student voice. And then finally, we end the year with the rally. The rally is held in April at the Iowa State Capitol. And so we bring together about 400 students and teachers to meet with legislators and to hear from legislators and host some really meaningful discussions about student voice and the current state of Iowa's education. So like I said, we've been doing this for 4 years now. We've hosted a total of, I believe, 11 events. We have a rather large outreach. But the cool, numbers aside, the coolest thing that we've seen so far are those individual stories from students who have joined our team and have actually seen benefits in their school. There's one girl, her name's Charlotte, and she actually works on our student team. And we met Charlotte just last year at Stu Camp. And we wanted to connect with Charlotte because She is an openly bisexual student, but she had problems in her school because some of her classmates were picking on her, and she had problems making friends. So we made it our goal on our student team to try and work with the school and help Charlotte and give her the resources she needs to fix some of these things. So in working with some of her teachers there and in providing these resources for her, she has been able to start a GSA in her school, and she has been able to kind of revolutionize the way that people think about the LGBT community in that school. And as a result, Charlotte has not only a much more positive school environment at school, but she also has our ISLI team to rely on and to ask for help when she needs it. And that's just one example, but there have been many cases like that across Iowa where students are actually able to change firsthand how things happen in their school. So that's a lot of stuff. That's ISLI. And then Merritt also mentioned my high school, Waukee High School. The most revolutionary and innovative thing that we've done at Waukee High School is called Waukee Apex. And I actually see someone in the chat here from Apex Learning, which is kind of a funny coincidence. I'm going to send you the URL to Waukee Apex's website so you could check it out. This is a program that we launched just last year, and this is a work-based learning program. So students leave the building for half of the day and they go work at a business with some of their classmates, and so they're working with a business to add value to the business. They're working in economic sectors that students have defined as being important to Des Moines and Iowa's economy. And then alongside all of this happening, they're gaining professional experience and work experience in these specific fields, as well as getting high school and college concurrent credit. So it's a really amazing system, and it's kind of revolutionizing the way that we think of education here in Waukee. And I think that helps to make us the best high school in the state. So anyway, that's kind of a little background, and I'll hand it back to Merritt.
Thank you, Justin. And you know what is I've found one of the most profound things about the work you are doing is how inclusive it is. I attended your event, and there are students from all across Iowa, from all different backgrounds. You guys have really worked to engage the LGBTQ community as well as English language learners, particularly anybody who wants a seat at the table in your leadership group or in their education is given one. And that is really essential to this work. There wouldn't be a need for student voice if we weren't all diverse and if students, weren't so unique. There wouldn't even be a need for us to have these conversations because we would want the same things. But education looks different for each of us, and each of us have teachers too, different learning styles and different needs that need to be met in order for us to achieve goals and include passions and lessons and so many different things, and diversity is kind of key to that, and I really appreciate how your organization has gone about including it. So thank you for that. And so I want to, in speaking of LGBTQ issues, I want to have Chelsea talk about how that was really affecting the culture at her school and what she and a group of students decided to do about that, and how it's impacting her school culture, as well as what this new school means and how students and teachers are building culture together.
My apologies for things that happened everywhere. But recently, me and some students are seeing that many kids in our classrooms, and when it came to lessons, had very disrespectful comments about the LGBT community, and just using the word gay and other words as insults to the students. And me and another student in the classroom, her name was Zoe. She also attended to the student voice thing as well a couple of weeks ago. But we were like, this is enough. We had enough of this, and it should stop. And so, I'm sorry about the noise in the background. And so we decided to confront our principal about it. And we were like, we don't really like how the students are disrespecting the LGBT community, and we want to see a change. We want them to just stop saying these words and as insults. And so the principal was like, all right, you guys make a presentation. And if you guys make a presentation, and I'm satisfied with it, you guys can present it on our Friday meetings that we have every Friday meetings. And so we made our PowerPoint, and we presented it in front of the whole school. And ever since that presentation has happened, we haven't seen any conflict in the classroom of students making those comments. And we just see that students are respecting the LGBT community more, and I'm just really proud of that, because just one simple just request can cause a major difference in the school environment.
Thank you, Chelsea, and I think the work you're doing around that is really cool, and I'm excited to see how your culture progresses over the year and as your school grows. Leah, I have had the opportunity to work with you and the Student Voice team at Swansea, and I'll talk a little bit about that after we finish up, about using, the model you guys have used at Swansea to include students in the conversation. But I would love for you to talk about being in a rural setting. You're in a rural setting in South Carolina, but your school is doing or attempting a lot of innovative things, trying to move towards entirely project-based learning. And I'd love for you to talk about some of the positive and negative experiences students are having with that, and how, you're combating learned helplessness and using your voice to improve PBL in your school.
Well, project-based learning has definitely been a very interesting experience for us. They definitely tried to implement it very, very strongly at our freshman academy when I was a freshman, because I had the same principal then that I do now. And some of the positives were definitely the fact that when we were doing these projects, it was basically, that was the entire lesson. You were expected to research the information, find a way to format the information, present the information, all in a period of time that was set before you. And what I really loved about it, I was one of the students, I felt like I really strived when I did these projects, because I didn't realize until the very, very end how much information I was learning, because the way the projects are set up, they let you research something usually that you find passionate to yourself. You get to choose a stance on an issue. One of the most memorable ones I did was a project on nuclear energy. And throughout the entire project, I was like, this is kind of pointless. I'm not getting anything out of this. Well, then we got to the end, and I had to stand up and present. And I could answer every question that my teacher asked me, because I had researched so in-depth about the nuclear energy process for this project, and I got to choose my stance. A lot of kids chose that nuclear energy was a bad thing, but I chose that it was a good thing. And it lets us formulate arguments and pick sides and find a way to back up our opinions with information. And it teaches you soft skills, because you're learning how to present things and collaborate with others, because one of the things, we had to sit down and we had to argue with somebody, or think critically with somebody, maybe not argue, that had chose the other stance. And so it's teaching us all these different ways to go through these processes that we're going to have to use when we get to the workforce, which I think is really, really important. But definitely one of the downside is, like you said, the learned helplessness. Students who struggle managing their time, who are so used to the teacher, nudging them on, saying, hey, it's time for you to do your work, kind of the whole middle school mentality. Students who are used to that really struggle with project-based learning, because they don't know how to manage their time correctly. And so they get to the end of the project and they're nowhere near finishing, because they had been wasting their time playing games on the computer or something like that. And so it's got its positives and its negatives. And I think a huge part of project-based learning is it depends on the person. If you're a very self-motivated person, project-based learning is definitely an asset because it lets you work at your own pace, try new things, and share your opinion on the topics. But definitely if you're a student who struggles to manage your time, project-based learning is definitely a challenge because you're not used to having to set deadlines and push yourself. Even though those are things that you need to learn how to do, it definitely affects a lot of the students' grades because they're not necessarily sure how to do it when it's first thrown in front of them.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. And I'm sure many teachers can recognize some of the issues Leah's talked about, and working through those with your students as we work to innovate and provide an education that prepares students for the 21st century and the soft skills that they're going to need for life beyond classroom walls. But I really would like to engage with the audience, so please continue to ask questions and let us know what you'd like to hear, so we can take some time to answer questions. But I do want to get back to some of the nuances of what each of our panelists are doing in their schools. One thing, and I have here practical hacks. I was recently at a conference with the group who's doing School Retool, which is just taking small things that can make a big impact on school culture. And they include things like inviting a student to a faculty meeting, like Chelsea was able to do, or inviting a student to your own department meeting, maybe once a 9 weeks. Just really small things you can do to have an impact on making students feel included in the learning process, taking ownership and being empowered and engaged. So I wanted Justin to talk about, I first heard about this from him. Some students in his school and were able to sit in on a hiring panel for one of their teachers. And that's something I think is really incredible because I'm sure, as you guys know, when there are teachers who don't like kids, which happens remarkably in schools, the experience for everyone isn't always the best. So I think having students be a part of the hiring process, maybe after the first or second round, is really interesting. So could you maybe talk about that, Justin, or just generally, how you guys have been able to transform your student council into a group that's making policy changes?
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to, our hiring committee, was actually in the hiring of our new high school principal this year. So we had well, there's kind of a big shift happening where our superintendent is moving. So we had to bring in a new principal to the high school because our old principal would be replacing the superintendent. And so in hearing about this, we kind of took it upon ourselves to make sure that students were represented in this, and we learned a lot through the experience. So we had, I believe it was six students that sat in on this interview committee with the principal candidates. Another hiring committee at district office had narrowed it down to 4 candidates. So myself and 5 other students interviewed these 4 candidates. And we were basically given free reign to ask whichever questions we wanted. So whatever it ranged from, implementing student voice into the classroom, or ensuring that students get, different lunch options, or ensuring that students have say in the way their schedules are built, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really fantastic to have that opportunity. But on the flip side of things, we also learned a lot from this because there were 2 other interview committees that were interviewing these principals in addition to the student committee. There was the student committee and then the district office committee, which were most of the district's administrators, and then a teacher committee, so just teachers that work here in the high school that also interviewed the principal. And our student committee took these 4 candidates and basically ranked them as first place all the way down to 4th place. And it actually ended up being our 4th place candidate, so our least favorite candidate, who is now principal of the high school. So even though we were given the opportunity to share our voice and to ask questions, the follow-through and the actual usage of that information that we provided district office wasn't used. And we've also heard kind of through the rumor mill that the teacher committee wasn't a fan of this candidate either, and that it really just came down to administration that hired him anyway. So even though we were given that opportunity, we're still working on making sure that our voice is in fact represented and not just heard. So we learned a lot from that.
Oh yeah, well I actually hadn't heard about that one. I think I spoke to some students at your school last year about, I think they perhaps were on a hiring panel for a course teacher or somebody in the music department. So that's really interesting. And sounds like a good experience and reminds us that we do have a ways to go before students and teachers are equally recognized for their contributions and their voices in those decisions. But I wanted to ask Chelsea. Chelsea, I met you in Washington, D.C. when Student Voice held an event with Facebook, and we talked a little bit about some of the things you guys are doing at WLA around school culture. You're really building school culture as the first class of this school and with your teachers. And one thing I really remember is the student, essentially student survey or student interest piece that you guys started at the beginning of the year so teachers could really get to know you. And you mentioned that you were really close with one of your teachers, maybe your course teacher, I believe. And I've done some work with organizations like Gallup, and on their Hope survey, that's one of the biggest indicators of positive school culture, you know, having someone in the school who believes in you. And so I think that's really key, and that's why teachers are so crucial to positive school climate. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that and how your school climate has been improved by your relationships with your teachers.
Well, like you already said, that's a survey at the beginning of the year. Every student has to take it, and we just have to talk about what our interest in and what we believe in and what we have, like, what we're really passionate about. And it's anonymous, so the teachers don't know who it is, and so they won't pick favorites and stuff, and they'll be put into houses just like in Harry Potter. And so when it comes to afterwards, we have advisory after lunch or before lunch, and we will talk about how our feelings are outside of school, about what's going on what's going on. My bad, I'm talking to somebody else. But we were talking about how, like, we would talk about outside things like debates and what's going on with the election, and then how we are feeling inside. Sometimes we would talk about how our emotions are and like how we feel about grades, and those teachers will talk about us, like so they can fix our grades and all that, and they would just comfort us. So basically, I've gotten a close relationship with basically all my teachers. I can really trust them when it comes to stuff. And like Justin, our school is making students interview possible teachers, and I was able to interview a possible 10th grade English teacher for next year, and also our school psychologist. And so just like since building those relationships with the staff and the teachers can like really help, that shows that they really care about how we feel in the school building, and just like student voice basically. And just like saying our opinions of what we believe that how teachers will be or how teachers are right now is like really changing their school culture as well, because everybody's just getting along with everybody. It's just like one big family.
It's so cool that you had the opportunity, like Justin, to be able to be a part of a hiring process. Your school, I'm really excited to see what happens with Washington Leadership Academy over the next few years. I think it's going to be really cool. So Leah, going back to a very traditional public school in a rural setting that's working really hard to, you know, overcome some of the challenges that maybe Chelsea School doesn't face with, you know, buy-in. I would love for you to talk about the Student Voice team. You guys have started your Student Voice Club, and also kind of compare that to Student Council and how you guys have been able to make this really inclusive group that's getting things done.
Well, compared to our student council, student voice is a bit different. The student council is open to anybody. They plan more spirit-related events for our high school. They take care of, the pep rallies and the spirit weeks and the things like that. They're focused more on, student involvement and representing, school pride. The student voice took a more, professional approach. We were put together, we're a group of students who were selected by our advisor because we're definitely a very diverse panel of students. We all come from different backgrounds, different cultures, different life experiences. And the purpose of the Student Voice Group was to talk about issues that the student body was facing that weren't necessarily spirit related. They were more educational issues that we were facing, things like how lesson plans weren't working, how certain teachers we didn't feel like were giving as much effort as they should to teach us the material we needed to know, things like that. And then it came down, ultimately a lot of times it comes back to the funding and the resources we feel like we're lacking that's hurting our educational opportunities that we talk about in Student Voice. And a lot of the things we've been doing, we look back at the policies and a lot of the legislation that goes on in South Carolina, and we're definitely huge advocates for realigning how schools are funded. So it's not necessarily relying on your tax base so much as the number of students you have, and making sure that every student has the same opportunities in a rural high school as a student in a more urban area has. And so we've traveled to the State House on multiple occasions. Like I said, we've met with several senators, our superintendent of education. We've quite recently, back before Christmas break, we hosted a panel of school districts in our area, which were the more rural school districts. We hosted our neighboring district, Orangeburg, Consolidated School District 4 and Orangeburg Consolidated School District 5. And we had schools, North High School and Wagner Sally High School come in, and they're actually a lot smaller than Swansea. We were the biggest high school represented in this panel that we hosted. But we wanted to invite them in because we wanted to talk to them about, the opportunities they have in their high schools and the programs and the clubs that they have and how they felt that it was affecting their education. And it was a really eye-opening experience to see how other high schools in our area viewed us and how they viewed each other. And it was definitely a great meeting because we got to sit down and talk about ways that even though we're from different school districts, ways that we could support each other, host fundraisers together, share resources, ideas. Say if someone in Swansea, we hosted a fundraiser that worked really well, we could share that information with these other schools so that they could try it also. And say if project-based learning was working so well for us, having our teachers get together and talk with their teachers about how it was working for them. And so it was a great way for us to share our resources with these neighboring districts. And that was something that Student Voice put on because we thought that even though we're not in the same district, we're all part of education in our state, and it's all something we want to work to make better. And so that's ultimately our goal in our Student Voice group, that even though we're small, we're trying really hard to make an impact on other people in the area and make an impact on our senators, because ultimately we have a voice, but they're representing our voice, so we want them to know how we feel, and so that's what we've been working towards.
That event, I still hate it. I missed it. I was in New Orleans for something, but I am just so incredibly proud of the work you're doing and the ownership you're taking in fighting for equity in South Carolina, and it's really, really cool. So I would love to, I keep seeing some chat about good ideas, and I'd love to have the panel share any additional ideas. A place where I've looked to see kind of practical ways to implement Student Voice is through the resources School Retool provides, through what I've seen on the road, of course. But I also just finished Student Voice by Russell Qualia, which is really interesting, coming from a student who helps run Student Voice. But I think there really are, his aspirations framework is really relevant to education today and figuring out how we get students in the mindset to be able to be active participants in their own educational experience rather than just sitting back and probably not enjoying the ride. So that was a really great resource, and we'll read. I would definitely recommend. So please, again, ask questions. We really want to be helpful to you. And if you have anything specific to your school we could chat about, we would love to do that. But now I'm just going to turn it back to the panel. Anybody who has something, Justin, Chelsea, or Leah, just practical hacks to small ways to implement student voice.
Well, I think one of the simplest ways, and something that's often overlooked, is just asking for feedback at the end of a class from your students. You know, it's always kind of hard after you get into the same lesson plans year over year to want to change things and et cetera, but it's so important that you're listening to your students' opinions and that you're valuing their feedback on the class, because it can take your class to whole new levels. And I've really seen that work well. But then beyond just asking for feedback at the end of class, it's also really important to start with student voice right at the beginning. So with those Waukee Apex courses I mentioned earlier, those economic sectors that we focus on are based around what students want out of an education. And the whole curriculum of the course is really shaped to reflect their personal interests and their personal goals and plans as an individual. So upon entering the class, the first thing they're asked is, you know, what do you want out of this class? What do you want to learn? What are you looking to get into? And questions like that. And then really a very specific curriculum is developed for them based around those ideas. So it's stepping stones. You know, you can start with feedback, and then you kind of work your way up to implementing student voice into all parts of your class.
I want to go to answer some of these questions, and you guys also feel free to jump in to answer as well. Summer Shelton asks, do we have examples of student voice in primary grades? And I want to share one of my favorite student voice stories, because the work I do is generally focused on high school and middle school, but I've been fortunate to go to some elementary and primary schools, particularly one that's in Leah School District. It's a public Montessori school doing some awesome work. But I want to share one of my favorite stories from Kentucky. A group of fourth graders had a really run-down playground, and they wanted to do something about that. So they decided as a class they were going to research playground equipment, and they all had Andrew Brennan, who was our national field director, come in to do a student voice session. They designed their ideal playground, and then they searched in catalogs and on the internet, and even did some research about how, you know, extra time outside is beneficial to school culture and learning in the classroom. And they created a proposal for their school board, and they presented it, and they didn't get the exact playground they wanted, but they were able to compromise. One of those fourth grade students helped author an op-ed that was published in a local paper in Kentucky. And so there really is some incredible work happening, even in primary school. And I think, as Justin said, feedback is something you can solicit from any age. Just asking, you know, something fun. Did you enjoy that today? And then more importantly, just really getting to know what your students are passionate about, and including those things and lessons are just really great ways to make students feel valued and make their voices feel heard.
Something I'd definitely like to add, Justin, when you were talking about the feedback, it really sparked something, a memory of mine, about something that my chemistry teacher does that I think is something that every teacher should do after every unit they teach. What my chemistry teacher does is after every unit, she sits down with two students. She'll sit down with a student who aced her test, and she'll sit down with a student who sadly bombed one of her tests. And she'll sit down and she'll ask us, she said, she'll ask the student who did well, she said, how did you learn this information so well? Was there something I did? Was there something that you did differently that made this test easier for you? And then she'll ask the same questions to the other students. She said, why was this unit such a struggle for you? Is there something going on? Are there external factors? Was this lesson plan not set up correctly for you? And she'll listen to both sides, and then she'll take that information and she'll use that on the next unit, because some of the information she'll get back is the student will say, well, this unit you gave us a bunch of worksheets, but you didn't give us as much direct instruction, and that didn't work for me. Or she'll hear from the other student, she said, well, I loved having all the worksheets, but I could use some more direct instruction also. Or she might hear vice versa. And whatever she hears, she takes that and she implements that in the next unit that she teaches, which I think is an amazing way to find the perfect way to plan her lesson, because she's listening to what her students want and what's helping them. And ultimately, I think that's the goal of every teacher, to help your students and find their learning style so that it makes their education process so much easier for them.
Yeah, no, I think that's super relevant. We talked about that. I want to answer Chrissy Engel's question, or maybe provide some thoughts, because I don't know if there's an exact perfect answer to it. So what do we do about students and student voice for students who are more reluctant to share, and not just the louder ones are heard? And that is always something that is a struggle with student voice, because there's definitely like token students who get selected to be a part of panels who are loud voices. But I really have learned over my time that everybody has things to contribute. And so particularly the way we've gone about soliciting student voice and understanding how students think about their education has been through roundtable discussions. And so we generally ask to have about 10 students, but you can do this in your own classrooms outside of school. And select students who you don't ever hear from, students who aren't the ones who raise their hand in class or who come to you for help. Take them aside and take initiative to ask the students who aren't going to be the ones who are normally picked for focus groups or roundtables. Bring them in and have them talk about their experiences. Sometimes it takes some coaxing. We've definitely seen that. But eventually you get, I think, perhaps even more powerful things that aren't sugar-coated. And that has been my experience. We always start every roundtable with, tell us something about your school that your teachers and administrators don't know. And usually these conversations happen without teachers, but I think if you come with an authentic interest and, make it a team effort, you're going to get honesty and hear some things that are really valuable. Any other questions we can be helpful in chatting through? Okay, so Summer, I assume you are an online teacher. I think you might have mentioned that. So it's actually interesting and something I might be able to help with. I actually spent the first 9 weeks of my high school experience in an online public school. I tried to try out that path. And I think there are definitely ways to engage students online. And sometimes it's easier. Without that face-to-face, I think that can be hard, but you are constantly almost forced to reach out to students individually. These are some of the only ways you can connect with students online. I found that Google Hangouts are just a great way to get to know students, and that's usually how I conduct all of my calls with students when I'm talking to them. But really soliciting student feedback, particularly in online learning, is just so necessary. And kind of maybe directly asking questions is really important in that setting, because I think students don't always respond super well to surveys or things that are online, especially if they're already on an online experience. Having something a little bit tailored, and I know that can be difficult, especially if you're teaching a large group of kids in an online setting. But I mean, I can remember having a Spanish teacher reach out to me because I was really nervous about taking Spanish online. and just her being really helpful. And then also I took econ online later in my high school career, and had a really incredible teacher that I could text when I needed things, and I felt really included in classroom culture. So I hope that was helpful. So I have a little bit of experience, but probably, of course, not to the extent someone who's enrolled in that full time still might. Anything else our panelists have to add before we wrap up? We've got about 5 minutes left. Chelsea, any final thoughts about things you'd like to see happen in schools? Leah, I'm sure you have some final thoughts. I'd love to hear kind of your maybe message to educators about how to value students and their voices.
You know, I always have something I want to say. Definitely just talk to us. We always have feedback we want to give. We always, even though it might not see it, we do try. Some people try a little harder than others, obviously. But sit down. I felt what I've started to see over like the course of like high school is that you feel more passionate and excited about going to school and learning about things when you have connections with people, which is something like Chelsea was saying, how they had that mentor program with their teachers. We kind of have the same thing at Swansea. We have the periods on Wednesdays and Thursdays where we go to the same teacher every day for, like I said, on Wednesdays and Thursdays, we meet with the same teacher, and they sit down and they talk with us about our grades, our plans after high school, how our home lives are, and things like that. And building those connections in high school definitely make you more comfortable, make you more excited about coming and wanting to learn. And so I think that's definitely something that I hope more high schools start to implement. And hopefully that's something that teachers can take away and just ask questions. We are always, if you ask us a direct question, we will always answer. So, and once again, thank y'all for giving us this opportunity to come and talk with y'all. It's really been an amazing experience, and I can't wait to take these things back to my school, because I'm going to tell my administrators that I want to sit down in the middle of a meeting where they're trying to hire one of my teachers, because I think that's something that students should definitely have a voice in. So it's been a great experience for me. So thank y'all.
Thank you so much, Leah. It's always a pleasure to hear from you and hear your thoughts, and especially coming from your environment and how you've just done so well being an advocate for yourself and your classmates. So Justin, I'll have you share a few words about your message, and especially leading your own organization in Iowa.
Well, again, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity, and thanks to everyone for listening, because that is, after all, the first step in implementing student voice is hearing things directly from students. I suppose my final message would be to really take ownership in the idea that you have more freedom than you're using. Even though you have administration and other teachers and policy and Common Core to follow, there's still a lot of freedom there that's probably untapped. So even if a student comes to you, approaches you with something that you seem or that you feel is kind of impossible, there's always a way you can make it happen. When we started Apex here at the school a few years ago, we went and visited a model school in Kansas City, and I remember thinking, this is never going to happen in Waukee. This is impossible. This is a huge program. It's going to take forever to implement. It's not going to happen. But here we are 3 years later with a program that's recognized internationally and has really kind of set the precedent for work-based learning programs. So I really want you to understand that regardless of the outside forces, you'll always have that opportunity to use your freedom and to develop a curriculum that you're comfortable with and that your students enjoy.
Thank you, Justin. You guys are just doing such incredible work in Iowa, and please check out the link to the Iowa Student Learning Institute to learn about the model they're using there. I want to just thank you all for joining us. We so appreciate you taking time and dedicating your evening to listening to us and listening, because I think that is always the number one thing when it comes to student voice. Sometimes we host these things where we ask students, but perhaps we're not listening. And I can even be guilty of it too when I'm in roundtables. So we have to listen to each other, and it's a huge part of building empathy, and it's a huge part of building positive school culture. So we just so appreciate you joining us tonight, and my contact information is here. I'm on Twitter, at Merritt Jones, and you can email me, merritt@stuvoice.org, and I would be more than happy to talk with any of you individually about specific things related to your school, and if we're in close proximity, I'd love to come visit and chat with your students. So please reach out. We want to help you. We're here and we exist to be a resource for you. So thank you again for joining us, and if Natalie has any final thoughts, I'll turn it back to her.
Thank you. I think I speak for everyone when I say this was such an amazing conversation. Really great ideas, powerful insights. You guys are 4 amazing young people who are changing the world. So we thank you for your work as well, and we appreciate your time and your insights that you've shared with us this evening. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'll mention it again quickly. This webinar will be recorded and archived, so you can refer back to any of these great ideas. We'll send you a follow-up link in an email within a couple days, and make sure that you have those resources as well. So thanks again for joining us this evening. It was absolutely incredible, and we hope to see you on future iNACOL webinars. Have a wonderful evening.